Good evening. So most of you probably know who I am, but those that don't, my name is Holly Jansen, and I am a charter member of Living Waters along with my parents and my two sisters. And I'm fortunate to have grown up here and now get to share it with my husband Jeremy and our daughter Sydney. I know I've shared my story a couple times before, but I'm thankful for this opportunity again, as I feel like our faith stories are always changing and evolving. I was born on May 7th, 1984 as a healthy baby. At first I was a pretty normal baby, but as the days and months went by, every time my parents would put me in my car seat, I would scream and cry. When I was around 8 months old, one day my legs suddenly stopped moving, and after many doctors' visits and tests, I was diagnosed with stage 4 neuroblastoma. The doctors told my parents I had a 50-50 chance of survival. So the doctors did 2 surgeries to remove the tumor, one on my spine and one on my abdomen, which thankfully they were able to get it all in those surgeries so I didn't have to have any kind of chemo or radiation. Unfortunately though, I was left with no feeling from my waist down. My parents were told that I would never walk and would have to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. But little did they know how much fight this little strong-willed independent girl had in her already. So much so that with the help of physical and occupational therapy and the use of lower leg braces, I learned how to stand on my own at 18 months, and I was walking on my own by 2 years old. Over the course of the next 15 years, I had a total of 26 different surgeries, 5 body casts, 2 leg lengthenings, more hospital stays than I can remember, countless doctor's appointments. You know, while my childhood was far from easy and was not like most kids, I was fortunate to have 2 extremely loving and caring parents who made sure I had as much of a normal childhood as possible. They taught me how to ride a bike with no training wheels, jump rope, shoot a free throw and do a layup, go on vacations, to sporting events, and when the time came, they even taught me how to drive a car. And as my dad would say, once I got my license, the engine on my car was rarely cold. Even with all the things I did, I certainly had plenty of times that I struggled to keep up or fit in. In my hardest of times, my parents would remind me and have me repeat Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. At one point, my mom even had me take this verse into my desk to remind me to not give up on myself. And to this day, this verse is still a verse that I tell myself, and my mom still reminds me of it too when I'm having a hard time. In the fall of my junior year of high school, I had one of my last surgeries, which went well, and I was on my way to recovering. However, the last couple of those, that October, my life was forever changed. Even after 20 years, I can still remember those days like it was just yesterday. That Sunday, I came here to church with my family, and afterwards I was talking with people about how I was doing. That afternoon, I laid down because I wasn't feeling very well, and after a bit, I woke up and I still wasn't feeling all that well, and thought we should probably take a look at my incision, to which we found it was starting to not look all that great. By 10 o'clock that night, I had the chills and spiked a fever, to which my parents decided it was time to take me to the ER. There they determined that I had an infection in my leg and that it was best for me to be transferred down to Minneapolis Children's Hospital. The next morning, my doctor confirmed that I had a staph infection and needed to have surgery to remove it. I went into surgery around 4 p.m. on the 30th, and what was supposed to be a 45-minute surgery quickly turned into a much longer and scarier process. My doctor finished the surgery, and the surgical team was completing my PICC line, which for those of you that don't know, it's a longer-term IV. And as they were moving me from the operating table to the radiology table, my vitals dropped drastically. I was touch and go for a very long time, and finally after they were able to get me stabilized, they moved me to ICU. When I woke up the next day, I panicked a bit because I had this tube in my throat and it was daylight out. My parents quickly came to my bedside, and I was doing motions to them to figure out what time it was because I knew that it was no longer nighttime and that something bad had happened. They told me the time of the day and explained to me what went on. They showed me a card I had got from my sisters, and on it read Happy Halloween. Tears quickly filled my eyes as I realized it was now Halloween Day, and almost an entire day had passed. It was one of the most scariest feelings I had ever had. And after that, the tube had came out, we were talking about what had happened, and I asked if my parents and Pastor Larry had been there. They said yes and asked me why. I said that I saw him standing over my bedside and that he told me he and God loved me and that he was going to read his favorite passage out of his red Bible. All I remember was that and feeling limp while seeing the white light of God as the OR team told me that they were going to take care of me. Going through this as a teenager and knowing that I almost died was very hard on me and affected me for quite a long time. I prayed to God all the time, asking him to help me feel better and help me be at peace with what happened. I really turned to him and my family for help, comfort, and guidance for dealing with all of it. Everything that happened during that time really showed me how much he really does exist and that miracles do happen. It also opened my eyes to not take anything for granted and to live my life to its fullest. While it wasn't until my mid-20s when I clung to Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. I believe God put this on my heart well before I even realized it. When I graduated from college, I was offered 2 different jobs, one for a company here in St. Cloud and the other for a Fortune 500 company in Minneapolis. Ultimately, I took the job in Minneapolis, packed up my stuff, and within a couple of weeks after graduation, I was now living in the big city. I spent about 6.5 years down there that certainly had its challenges, and I remember many conversations that I had with God about if I was doing what I was supposed to be. There were even times that I felt like I strayed away from my faith, but I always knew that God was there for me, and he would reassure me I was right where I needed to be. It's amazing how when you look back on your life, you can see moments that God starts to put one of his plans together for you. You see, it was about 10 years ago, this coming April, when Jeremy and I went out on our first date. We were both on Match, and I had seen his profile that January before, and it had caught my eye then, but something was telling me, not yet, Holly. So fast forward a couple months, we finally connected, chatted, and we went out on our first date. And he must have liked my quirkiness enough since he brought me as a date to a wedding the very next day. Needless to say, since then not a day has gone by where we haven't talked. We dated long distance for about 1.5 years when I felt it was time for me to come back home. After all, I knew in my heart that I'd always settle back here. So again, I prayed long and hard and decided to put it in God's hands. I started the process of looking for a new job and didn't have any expectations of how long it'd take. Within about 6 months, I got a new job, packed up my stuff, and moved back home, and yes, in with my parents. About 1 year after that, we got engaged and then married out on our farm that August. And like most do when they're dating, they talk about their hopes and dreams for their future, marriage, house, kids, dogs, etc. When Jared and I talked about if we'd have any kids, we both were on the same page that the likelihood was very small, especially with my medical history and not wanting to possibly pass cancer onto a baby. After we got married, we continued on as we always had with life, working, doing some kind of house or yard project, just simply enjoying life. But every now and then, the thought of having a baby radiated in the back of my mind. It wasn't saying one way or another, but rather, you shouldn't fully close that door yet, Holly. One thing that I've learned about myself is that I need a very clear no in order to not do something. And even after that, I still tend to push it to the limits. So with that said, I had never really been told by a doctor either, Holly, you should not have a baby. So before we decided to do anything, we thought it would be best for me to have genetic testing done to find out if there was a possibility that I could pass cancer on to a baby. When that came back as an extremely small chance, we had some real thinking and praying to do about what was next. Do we even try to have a baby? Do we use a surrogate? Do we adopt? Or do we simply just put all of this in God's hands and trust His plan? Even with all that wonder, we still hadn't talked with any of my specialists to get their input on me physically carrying a baby. If any one of them had any major concerns or apprehensions, that would be our sign. To my surprise, not one of them said no, but they rather supported me. They'd let me know that there could be a possibility of complications along the way, that I would need to have a C-section for the delivery, or honestly, everything could be simply just fine. It was at that point that we decided that we would just put this in God's hands. If we were meant to have a baby, we would, and if we couldn't, we would be okay. Well, little Miss Sydney Marie was born on October 1st, 2019. And to say I was shocked that we had a little girl is a complete understatement. In fact, the nurse said that I had one of the best reactions she has ever seen. She is our biggest blessing, and so thankful that God gave us this strong-willed, independent little girl. I certainly feel like I've met my match with her, but I wouldn't change it for anything. And I know that those traits will suit her well as she grows. Now, many women will tell you that being a mom is hands down one of the most challenging yet rewarding things that they've ever experienced. And I can certainly agree with that in general. It is challenging to be a mom. But when you throw a physical disability on top of it, it adds a whole new layer of complexity. Most of the last 3 years of our life, there hasn't been a week that's gone by where we haven't had to think about how to modify something or make things more physically manageable for me. But one thing I've learned, though, is how incredibly resilient and adaptable children are. Sydney doesn't know her mommy any other way, but she sure knows how to help me at times, well, and not really help me either at times. Now, if having a baby wasn't a challenge enough, a year ago in January, I had my 28th surgery of a total knee replacement. For years, I was having issues with my knee, and I knew given all the trauma it had endured, at some point, I was going to have to get it replaced. I saw my sister's orthopedic doctor here in town to establish care, and she suggested I do physical therapy to see if that would help. When I met with my physical therapist, Chad, he was pretty surprised at how bad my knee was for only being in my mid-30s. It wasn't long after meeting with him, he started telling me about a knee replacement and what it could do for my quality of life. Since we both knew that surgery was inevitable, he suggested I get it done sooner rather than later, especially to make it a little bit easier chasing around a toddler. About a month later, I met with the surgeon and had my name added to the surgery list. And thanks to COVID, elective surgeries at the hospital had very small availability. Needless to say, my nerves were tested while I impatiently waited for that surgery to be scheduled. But I kept reminding myself that God's timing is always perfect and it will happen when it's supposed to. Surgery was finally scheduled, and as the day approached, I found out that visitors were not even allowed, or were not allowed, not even one person. Now let me tell you, even if you're a pro like me with surgeries in hospitals, there's something extra nerve-wracking about having to go into the hospital by yourself. There were certainly many prayers said that morning and many check-ins via text, and thankfully surgery went off without a hitch. The stay was short, and the care team there was nothing short of amazing. To this day, I am so thankful I had that surgery when I did. It has made life more enjoyable in ways that I had never imagined, like being able to ride a stationary bike again, having a 3-wheeled bike outside, keeping up with Sydney, and overall just walking better. The last few years have been quite a ride with all the life changes and dealing with all things from the pandemic. I've certainly learned a lot about myself, and needless to say, my faith has been tested many times. But I'm constantly reminded that I'm stronger than I think, and God's grace and love are never ending. And even when we are in the trenches of life, God's plan and timing are always perfect. He will never leave us, and to always lean on Him for strength and guidance. Thank you.